Get ready for a blitz battle for the ages. It's the strategic powerhouse Dmitry Korobov versus the tactical genius Fabiano Caruana. This is going to be electric. Korobov opens with pawn to d4, and Caruana responds with the solid Nimzo Indian defense. Both players develop their pieces classically, building a solid foundation in the center of the board. The tension builds as black challenges white's central control. Pawns are exchanged on c4, opening lines for the bishops as both sides complete their development and get ready for the middle game fight. White's queen comes to e2, preparing to connect the rooks. After another trade of pawns in the center, the opening phase concludes, and the stage is set for a complex strategic battle. And Korobov uncorks a fantastic move, rook to d1. This looks quiet, but it's a brilliant, deep idea. The point is, a sound sacrifice. If black takes the knight on f3, the queen simply recaptures on f3, and after knight to c6, white's bishop develops to e3, with a powerful attack brewing. Caruana decides to challenge a different piece, capturing the knight on c3, and white's pawn recaptures on c3. A fantastic reply, and the only move that keeps the advantage. The key idea is that if black's queen now comes to a5, knight to e5 is a crushing response, winning material. The middle game maneuvering begins. White shores up the center, while black's queen probes for weaknesses. Both sides improve their pieces, looking for the right moment to strike. Caruana creates counterplay on the queen's side, pushing his pawns forward. Korobov responds by rerouting his knight, preparing to meet the threats and launch his own attack on the other side of the board. The dance continues as the queens shift positions, eyeing targets all over the board. White creates a small escape hatch for the king with a pawn push, a useful prophylactic move before the storm. Now, white's main strategic plan becomes clear. The rooks are doubled on the e-file, seizing control and putting immense pressure on black's position. This is textbook positional chess, and right here, black plays a seemingly natural developing move, but it's an inaccuracy that lets white's advantage grow. The much better plan was to create immediate queenside counterplay. The move was pawn to b4, and after rook to g4, pawn takes pawn on a3, the bishop recaptures on a3, and the rook comes to b8, keeping the game complex and balanced. But in the game, Caruana plays knight back to f6, a passive move that gives white a free hand to build a dangerous attack, and white doesn't waste a second. The knight leaps into the beautiful e5 square, and the rook swings over to h4, signaling the start of a massive kingside assault. Another inaccuracy from black. The knight retreats to e7, but this is too passive. Stepping the king to f8 was a much tougher defense, but now white's attack is becoming decisive. But just as the attack looks overwhelming, Korobov lets some of the advantage slip. There was a more forceful way to continue the assault. Knight to e4 was the killer move, and after knight to d5, queen to e5, queen to e7, the bishop joins the attack from c1, and the position is crushing. Instead, in the game, white plays queen to f4, giving Caruana a critical moment to regroup and fight back, and Caruana seizes the chance. He pushes his queenside pawns, creating serious counterplay and even managing to snatch white's pawn on a4. The game is suddenly back on. A major miss from white. Bishop back to c1 is far too slow. The engine was screaming for the sacrifice. Bishop takes pawn on h7 check, which would have been a winning blow. Now the game is completely equal. Black plays the solid bishop to e8, preparing to neutralize white's threats and consolidate his position. And another inaccuracy from white. Bishop to g5 just isn't the right plan. That same sacrifice on h7 was still the best move, and now black is actually the one with the advantage. But the advantage vanishes in an instant. A huge mistake from Caruana, who misses the critical defensive idea. The right move was pawn to h5, and after bishop to h6, pawn to g6, queen to f2, then pawn to a4, blunting the attack completely. But back in the game, he pushes the pawn to a4, and this tactical oversight throws away the win, letting white's attack come roaring back to life. Unbelievable! For the third time in this game, white misses the winning shot. This is the chaos of blitz chess at its finest. The move was bishop takes pawn on h7 and check. After knight takes the bishop, queen to h3, queen to a5. The rook comes to f1, and white is winning material. But in the game, Korobov plays queen to h3 directly, missing the sacrifice and handing the advantage right back to black once again. Black creates an escape hatch for the king with pawn to g6. It's a small slip, but Caruana is still holding the advantage. White plays knight to g4, but this isn't the most testing move. Pushing the pawn to g3 would have created more problems, and as it is, black's position continues to improve. And that's the critical mistake. Knight to h5 is a tactical blunder, walking right into a decisive combination. Simply trading knights on g4 was correct, but now the game has swung back to level after a chaotic sequence. And Korobov does not miss his chance this time. Rook takes the knight on h5, a brilliant, thunderous sacrifice tearing open the defenses and exposing the black king to a ferocious attack. What a shot! And Caruana takes the bait. The pawn captures the rook on h5, but this is exactly what white wanted. The attack is now unstoppable. The follow-up is swift and brutal. Bishop takes the pawn on h7 with check, the king is forced to f8, and the queen lands on h5, ready to deliver the final blows. But under maximum pressure, Caruana finds pawn to f6, a fantastic defensive resource, the only move to keep the game alive. And here's the beautiful point. If white plays bishop to g6, black simply takes the bishop on g6, and after queen to h8 check, the king escapes to e7, and black is actually winning a piece. White keeps the pressure on with bishop to h6 check, forcing the black king out into the open on e7. The queen repositions to f5, and the hunt is still on. With the king exposed, every move is critical, and this is an inaccuracy from black. There was a better way to coordinate his pieces for the defense. Bishop to f7 was the key move. After knight takes pawn on f6, knight takes knight, bishop to g5, the king would find safety on d7, winning material. But in the game, the rook lifts to a6, and this allows white to re-establish a completely winning position, and the bishop slides to g8, a very awkward move that puts even more pressure on black's scattered forces. And that is the decisive mistake. Bishop to f7 loses on the spot. Bringing the rook to d7 was absolutely essential for the defense, but now white has a simple combination to win a piece. White cashes in immediately, and bishop takes bishop on f7. It's not even the most precise move, but the position is so overwhelming that it doesn't matter. White is winning, and recapturing with the king is the final error, allowing a simple tactic that ends the game. The only way to fight on was to move the queen. Queen to c8 was required. Then after bishop to h5, rook to d7, bishop to g7, the king runs to d8, and black is still alive. But after the move played, the king takes the bishop on f7, and white has a crushing check that wins huge amounts of material. But wait. White misses the killer blow. Knight to e5 check is played, but queen to h7 check was the most clinical win, leading to the capture of black's queen. This still wins, but it's a much slower path. Black has no choice but to capture the knight with the queen on e5. And now Korobov finds the right idea. Queen to h7 check. This is the key. After the king moves, white will simply take the queen on e5, and the position completely collapses for black. The king is forced to e8, and white's pawn captures the queen on e5, leaving a completely won endgame. In a hopeless position, black plays pawn to f5, but there was a slightly more resilient defense. Rook to c6 was the better try. Then, after pawn takes f6, knight takes f6, queen to h8 check, the king runs to d7. But after the move in the game, pawn to f5 is played, making white's task even easier. The bishop lands on g5, shutting down any hint of counterplay. Black's rook moves to a8, but this allows white to create a decisive passed pawn and win even faster. And there it is, pawn to c6. This pawn is the game winner, and black is defenseless against it, and this is the final blunder of the game. The king steps back into the line of fire, allowing a forced checkmate. The only way to continue was rook takes the pawn on c6. After queen to g8 check, king to d7, queen takes the rook on a8. Black can play on, though hopelessly lost, but in the actual game, king to f8 walks right into a mate in 2. And in a final, shocking twist in this absolutely wild game, white misses the mate. An incredible moment. The simple bishop to h6 check, followed by king to e8 and queen to d7 would have been checkmate. But instead, Korobov plays bishop to f6. The position is still completely winning, but the instant mate is gone. And at this point, Fabiano Caruana has seen enough. Despite white missing the mate, the position is completely hopeless, down a full rook with no counterplay. Black resigned, and Korobov takes the win. Here's just one line showing how hopeless it was. If black takes the pawn on c6, queen to h8 check, the king runs to f7, queen to g7 check, and after king to e8, white's attack is decisive.